Judge Joe Brown's all-new barbecue sauce and seasoning. Justice in the form of flavor.
Law firms will take this as a retainer.
What? It must be a law firm where they hungry as hell. Now you gonna help me with this parole I'm dealing with?
Judge Joe Brown's all-new barbecue sauce and seasoning. Justice in the form of flavor. With one taste of our premium blends of all-natural ingredients, herbs, and spices, you'll fall in love with meat all over again. Judge Joe Brown's all-natural barbecue sauce collection is made up of 2 zesty flavors, original and spicy. There's only one way to bring order back to barbecuing. Just add Judge Joe Brown's all-natural barbecue sauce and seasoning, and you be the judge.
Jimmy Carter, he died 100 years old.
I think he's a very misunderstood person. I met him and had about a half-hour conversation with him one time at a convention. He's a real straight-up guy. But one thing people don't know about him, when he ran against Ronald Reagan had done this movie during World War II called Run Silent, Run Deep, when he played a submarine commander. And they kept talking about this war hero, Ronald Reagan. The truth of the matter is in contrast, Jimmy Carter graduated #1 in his class from the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and he wound up being a nuclear attack submarine commander, and he wound up commanding a boomer, that is a nuclear missile submarine, an SSBN, and he wound up being the Commodore in command of the Northeast Atlantic U.S. nuclear missile submarine fleet during the height of the Cold War. So this guy was Hunt the Red October for real and got commendation after commendation. So this guy was down in the Arctic ice playing tag with Soviet nuclear submarines for real. And it was very interesting when he was opposed by Reagan. They kept talking about Reagan, the hero submarine commander, which for all of Reagan's merits was not true. He just simply played in a movie. But the real life submarine commander who did that tag stuff you saw in Hunt the Red October, starring Sean Connery, that was Jimmy Carter, but nobody paid attention. They kept talking about he was a peanut farmer. His main thing that he did wrong is he neglected to keep his military prepared, and it was a total debacle when they attempted to do the hostage rescue thing out of Tehran, when Iran took over the American embassy. That was totally botched. It was a debacle.
You think that cost him the presidency?
I think it did. And I mean, I noticed something else too. When Carter was in as president, the last year he was in 1980, I had been in private practice not long, but I was doing pretty well. And this was back in 1980, 45 years ago. And for that year, I cleared $80,000+, income. And for whatever merit you can assign to Reagan, the bottom dropped out of the economy. And I was disgusted to find that I had actually paid more in taxes, not as a percentage, but in actual dollars, than Boeing Aircraft had, than North American Rockwell had, than IBM had. And that year later, the bottom dropped out. And I didn't make but $28,000 that year, and I had all kinds of problems. So all of my clients went broke. People were laying out on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
I remember being in Philadelphia with a client, a grand jury problem there. And I saw all of these homeless people sleeping on the hot air grapes on the sidewalks in downtown Philadelphia. And everybody that I represented was going broke. So it was very bad.
Can you tell her that you're gonna
Can you
call
still
her
hear
back?
me?
I can hear you, but can you tell her that you
Hello?
can you hear me?
Hello?
You can't hear me. You can't. I can hear you. Guys, can you guys hear me? These little heifers that he be dating, honey, you know, be thinking that he supposed to just drop everything to pick up the phone for them. No, it's they're no, these are floozies calling him. Yeah. Someone is calling him a floozy. He'll come back up. Here you go. Did you tell her stop calling you?
I just said I'm on a podcast. I'm not going to tell her to stop calling me.
I told him. I said it was a floozy.
It wasn't a floozy. It was a 2-year-old who picked the phone up and dialed.
Like I said, a floozy.
Now, 2 years old on that.
2 years old don't know how to pick up the phone and dial.
Yeah,
No,
they do. This one does.
I know who you're talking about, honey.
I know, but this one does all the time. So
Okay.
anyway,
Well, whatever.
anyway, it's a mess. And everybody was broke. I mean, people started staying in their brother-in-law's trailer, and people were out of jobs. And I dropped from $80,000 a year in 1980 down 1982. I didn't make but 28,000, 26,000. So that was a hell of a loss of income. So yeah, I don't remember those days fondly.
Well, one more thing on Jimmy Carter, because this is the former president of, well, his son, former president of Iran's son, Pahlavi Reza, and this is a thing where he says Jimmy Carter destroyed Iran.
I want to go back to the Carter administration. The only individual in that administration who understood what could be the consequences of such a regime taking over was Zbigniew Brzezinski. In fact, I remember the discussion I had with him because I happened to be at the White House on my birthday, October 31, 1978.
Wow. You're at the White House October 31st, 1978.
I flew up from Reese Air Force Base. That's where I was training. I came to Washington. I had a short meeting with President Carter, and we had a longer discussion at the time with our ambassador at the time, Ardeshir Zahedi, and we were together with Zbigniew Brzezinski. The rest of Cyrus Vance, Gary Sick, Clark, all of those guys were completely on this premise of let's create a religious belt to contain communism from spreading into the area. That was the theory of the Carter administration. So backing Khomeini, creating a religious belt like a dam to protect the region from the communism to gain influence in the area, namely the Soviet Union. Little did they know that at the time the KGB had over 40,000 Iranians under their control, many of them dressed as mullahs, leading prayers in Mashhad and Isfahan and other countries. They already had their influence. They were already there.
Did your father know? Did he already know or no?
Didn't he warn so many governments that if I go, Iran will become Iranistan? It was not less than a year after he left that the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Look at the whole downfall, the domino effect that it took. But that was the leading theory of the Carter administration at the time, containing communism. When that backfired, and Saddam took advantage of a weakness of the Iranian military because most of their heads were being executed by the revolutionary regimes. Many of our officers, our best officers, were executed. And he thought that it would be a preventive attack vis-a-vis Iran, who was trying to already gain territory, which propelled us in the war.
Oh, that clip is like 9 minutes, and I don't
Yeah,
think.
I've been on that show before.
Yeah, you have.
Behind that wall behind everybody. It's just a little bit above. You go to the left on the screen of his head, up one square above that is
Yes,
where.
I know. But so to what he was saying about Jimmy Carter, destroyed Iran. Do you have any recollection?
Well, what that was about was that you had the Shah of Iran. Part of the problem with the Shah of Iran was that under the Nixon administration, Henry Kissinger, then the Secretary of State, had prevailed upon the Shah of Iran to call a series of meetings that resulted in the creation of OPEC at the instigation of the United States, or at least through the auspices of Henry Kissinger as Secretary of State. After OPEC was formed under the guidance of the Shah, what wound up happening is Henry Kissinger set up a series of meetings and persuaded OPEC to have an oil crisis to generate inflation, to knock down the debt loads of various and sundry entities in the United States. And they set up a scheme to deal with exploiting the ups and downs in the oil prices. At that point, the Shah had lost a lot of support in Iran. It seems the Carter administration may have, in fact, come up with this scheme to counter communism by setting up a strong religious state without understanding what that meant. See, I think one of the problems was, from as I recall events, that the perspective was the influence of religion in America without taking into context that religion in America was constrained by the First Amendment and American law. So it could not run a government without taking into the context of the consideration that in Iran, when you set up a religious thing or fostered or assisted in setting up a religious alternative to secular government, that religion could in fact take over and run the government. And it imbued a lot of fanaticism that resulted in the people that lived there who were fanatics taking over the American embassy, which led to his own downfall because our military was not prepared at the time as a result of the negative reaction to the NAM that was of enormous influence then. And
that was coming out of Vietnam. That was the Carter administration was right after the Vietnam, right?
Well, yeah, but not see. Okay, the NAM got concluded by Nixon. Nixon had to resign, and he was pardoned by his replacement, Jerry Ford. Jerry Ford was in office until 1976 when Carter got elected. At that point in time, that was just 3 years outside of when the NAM wound down, and there was a huge, huge negativism in the United States of America as a result of us suffering our first military defeat, which is what the NAM was, and also the lack of libido and the severe depression in the country as a result of what happened with Nixon. See, before Nixon, even with Lyndon Baines Johnson, which a lot of people don't understand now because they don't get the context, it's like you're having an English class in college, and it's a question of what is the proper sentencing structure. They say, well, the president uses this structure, so it is appropriate to use it for communication as formal English because the president of the United States does it this way. That's the kind of impact the president had. Now, after Nixon, everything went to hell and everybody kind of lost faith in the institution, and that spread to American institutions. And there was this severe malaise that Ronald Reagan took advantage of when he started doing rah-rah stuff that people went for. So Jimmy Carter was in the midst of an extremely negative anti-military atmosphere that existed in the United States, and rather than preparing special ops, what is now SOCOM, to handle such things, the military just didn't know how to do it. And I think a couple of the helicopters crashed in the desert when they were supposed to be staging to refuel to do the mission. Everything got miscued, and it was a big live mess, and the rescue mission failed. So Carter lost the election. It was very bad.
Yeah. I think that his loss for re-election for presidency was intentional.
Well, it was inevitable. It was like the country was.
He had too much against him, and I think that was intentional, so that the people would turn, the American people would just turn against him. But
here's the thing. Like I'm saying, the thing with the morale of the country was just about this high off of zero.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really. It's like people had all this faith in the U.S. government. We used to, even nutrition-wise, well, the government has said this is AAA grade so-and-so, so it must be good. The government says do this, it must be good. The government has rated this so-and-so, so it must be good. And then after Nixon did what he did, a whole big swath of the American public just lost faith in their government. So Carter was the first elected president that came into office after that. Jerry Ford had gotten it because Spiro Agnew resigned and then went to jail. And after that, because of his being the House minority leader under the Constitution, he filled the vice presidency. He worked up a deal with Trigger Dick Nixon. Nixon resigned. Ford pardoned him, and he was the president of the United States at that time. And he maintained office until the next scheduled election, which was 1976, when Carter whipped him and got in. But there was this malaise, and Reagan came in and made everybody feel good. So he assigned a lot of scapegoats that America said, okay, we can blame them. It was kind of what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Germany had just lost this war. It was a new nation. It wasn't even 50 years old at the time. And they couldn't understand it because they'd gotten this hype about how great they were. So they lost the war.
World War I.
World War I, yeah, and it was suffering great economic hardship, and Adolf and the Nazis gave them scapegoats to blame. So Ronald Reagan used Carter and a number of other things as scapegoats to blame, and, you know, people were seizing that, and he just let the military go somewhere it didn't need to go because nobody wanted to do anything with a military at that point, see.
Right. Well, all in all, 30 seconds, if you had to sum up President Carter, his legacy, what would you say?
A fine man who just was not in the right place at the right time for the office. And I would add this, he did a lot of good before he got in office as a naval commander. And he did a lot of good when he was no longer president with what he did on his own. And one thing he set up that people are unaware of is he negotiated between Menachem Begin, who was prime minister of Israel, and Anwar Sadat, who was president of Egypt. He got them to sign a peace treaty in 1978, 76, 78. And that restored some stability to the Middle East. And since then, the U.S. has military bases in Egypt. It has close connections with Israel, and it relies upon both of them to give them to give us the intelligence one up on what's going on in the Middle East. So you can't assign that credit to Jimmy Carter. That's one of the positive things he did do.
Okay. Well, R.I.P. to Jimmy.